A typical Sunday afternoon growing up was to be piled in the back of the station wagon and driven down the Allegheny River to the Kenzu Dam project. My dad was a frustrated engineer and loved to watch the intricacies and the progress of such a project. I remember in the latter days of that project, after the Indians had been relocated and their villages destroyed, that the land took on a barren, desolate, God-forsaken cast. And yet, even as a young boy, I could sense as we drove through there in the eerie silence that this was holy ground. This was sacred space. It is that strange dualism of the wilderness, God-forsaken and yet sacred, that we find throughout the pages of the scriptures. The image of the wilderness is both a sign of barrenness and desolation, but also an intense presence of God. It is fertile ground where God's people grow up. Whether we talk about Moses and the people who escaped Egypt, who wandered in the wilderness for 40 years until they reached the promised land, or we talk about Elijah and the many wilderness treks he makes trying to escape Ahab and Jezebel, or we look at the exile in Babylon, a wilderness not of a desert, but of a foreign place. Or whether we talk about those that go back to Jerusalem after the exile and find it in desolation. If we turn to the New Testament, we hear that voice crying out of the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord." And then there is Jesus' temptation in the wilderness, and the feedings in those desolate places late at night. In each of those cases, there is both desolation and promise. The promise of God's presence, bringing forth something new out of the desolation and barrenness. It is a drastically different people that emerges from the wilderness in Sinai and enters into the promised land. Elijah is transformed. The exiles learn new skills. Those that return home discover that they need help from the outside and reach out into new and creative ways. The voice that cries in the wilderness prepares the way for one who is yet to come. Jesus gains a true understanding of himself and his mission in that wilderness temptation. And those that eat of those few loaves and fishes see a sign of the kingdom that is to come. We find ourselves these days in a wilderness, the COVID wilderness. It is both barren and strange, a foreign territory for all of us. We have struggled. We have thought at times that it was indeed God-forsaken. And yet, if we think about it, we recognize the presence of God even in the midst of these trying times, calling forth something new from us. Not always welcome, not always easy, but what may be needed for the future. I've been stretched and pulled in ways I do not care to be stretched and pulled. And yet I recognize that if I am to prepare the church for the future, I need to grow in these ways. How is God pulling and stretching you these days? And what skills might you be learning that will help you in the days ahead? I do not know what life will look like when we come out from under the COVID cloud and we leave this wilderness journey. But I do know in the meantime, God will continue to grow us in new ways, that we might be better prepared to meet the future, that we might be stronger, healthier, and more unified in community, that we have lots to offer and a long way yet to go. But God will be with us in the midst of this. Of that, God has promised. Guide me, ever great Redeemer, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but you are mighty. Hold me with your powerful hand. Bread of heaven, feed me now and evermore. Feed me now and evermore. Open now the crystal fountain where the healing waters flow. Let the fire and cloudy pillar lead me all my journey through. Strong deliver, shield me with your mighty arm. Shield me with your mighty arm. When I tread the verge of Jordan, bid my anxious fears subside. Death of death and hell's destruction, land me safe on Canaan's side. Songs and praises, I will raise forevermore. I will raise forevermore.